So what does George Osborne have in common with Gordon Brown? On the face of it, not a lot, but actually what I'm going to talk about in this video is a little accounting trick that shows that George Osborne is as keen on fiddling the figures in his favour whenever he gets the opportunity, as arguably his predecessor Gordon Brown was. Hidden in this week's headlines, you might have missed a little episode, a little twist on the quantitative easing theme, and I want to cover that little twist right now and show you that although it's only a little twist on the whole quantitative easing program, it actually has one or two rather larger implications for the way the government and the Bank of England behave. Okay, so what is the twist? I'm going to get straight in with the story, and I'm going to go quite quickly on the first bit. So for those of you who have never come across quantitative easing, that's money printing essentially, you might want to take a look at my video, What is Quantitative Easing, first. Right, but with no more ado, let's crack on. Here's the story so far, then I'll introduce the twist. All right, and the story looks a bit like this. Essentially, the main players in my story so far would be the Bank of England. So here come my usual graphics. All right, going to put the Bank of England out there. Going to introduce something which I will call the Asset Purchase Facility, the APF for short, right, a separate entity, in theory, controlled by the Bank of England. And I'm going to introduce my third player, which is the UK Treasury. All right, and key characters in the story so far would include Mervyn King, the Bank of England governor, and of course you've got George Osborne, effectively sitting at head of the Treasury. All right, now, wind back the clock before I introduce this week's twist. Okay, the story so far looks something like this. In an effort to stimulate the UK economy, the Bank of England has embarked on several rounds of what's called quantitative easing. Quite a mouthful. What does that mean? Well, in essence, the Bank of England has charged this thing, okay, I'll just call it the APF, the Asset Purchase Facility, with going out into the market and buying government IOUs, gilts. Now, who issues and manages government IOUs on behalf of the government? It's actually this mob, the Treasury. The Debt Management Office is part of the UK Treasury, okay? But the Bank of England is charged with monetary policy, and monetary policy includes things like dropping interest rates, okay, to stimulate the economy, and also this thing called money printing, okay? So what the Bank of England has done is through this thing called the APF, if you lose the will to live at any point, fear not, hang on in there. It is a little bit complicated, this, but it's not too bad. What they've charged the APF with doing is buying up gilts, okay? Now, in order to do that, they need something to pay for gilts with, so approximately 375 billion pounds has been created by the push of a button, you might say, via the quantitative easing process, and there's a cost of that money of around 0.5%. Okay, so if you want to see it this way, the APF sort of borrowed from the Bank of England, and it's being charged 0.5% for the privilege. Right, that enables this beast to go out to the market and buy gilts. Okay, so cash, printed money, is being used to buy gilts, and we'll call that about 375 billion pounds worth. All right. Why? Now this is the bit of the video I'm going to keep nice and short because I have done a video on quantitative easing. So far what I'm describing is quantitative easing, if you like. Why do you want to do that? Well, number one, this pushes cash out into the cash-starved banking system. Okay. Number two, by removing gilts from the market, almost like forcibly buying them if you like, okay, you push the price up and the yield down. Okay, the idea being that you then force the people that were holding gilts to buy something else, maybe corporate bonds, okay, it doesn't matter what it is, but you force people out of the gilts market, that safe haven, into other parts of the market in an attempt to get things moving, stimulate growth, allow companies to get on with what companies do best, okay? Allow companies to borrow, in other words, by issuing bonds and so on. Okay, so the theory is that this QE program, whether it's working or not is a moot point, basically pushes cash into the banking system and has the ripple effect, okay, of stimulating companies and eventually consumers. It creates credit where credit didn't exist in the interbank market because banks are scared of lending to each other. Okay, that's a very compressed version of QE. So what's the twist? Right. Well, the twist is this: if this thing in the middle, the APF, holds a load of gilts, okay, and those gilts were originally issued by the Treasury's Debt Management Office. Gilts, as you know, IOUs come with a coupon. Right? If you hold a gilt, you expect to receive income. So what's been happening is the APF has effectively been buying gilts on behalf, you could say, of the original issuer. It's holding those gilts on behalf of the original issue of the Treasury. All right. So in some respects, you could say that the APF has effectively lent the Treasury 375 billion, that's one way of looking at it, on which the Treasury is paying them a return. Right? Whoever holds gilts gets a coupon, gets interest. Now, what is that interest rate? I'll call it I. Good question. Again, I could spend a day in a video, not a whole day, but half an hour, explaining that interest rate is derived from a mix of different gilts. It's quite hard to get the information with different maturities and coupons, but estimates have been made. So I'm going to call that around 2.9%. Now, you may be wondering where I'm going. Okay, this is the little twist. So what you've got is this special purpose vehicle, as it's called, APF, technically off the Treasury's balance sheet, okay? Technically part of the Bank of England's monetary operations in QE, buying up gilts, okay, paying the Bank of England for the money it needs to do so, and receiving effectively the equivalent of coupons on those bonds from the Treasury. Now, some of you will have spotted the opportunity to make some money here from QE, because 2.9% is more than 0.5%. Thanks very much for that, Tim. Okay, great insight. What that means is the income coming into here is more than the expense going out, which leaves them with a profit. A profit from QE of, let's call it, 35 billion. Put it another way, that represents the difference between, if you want to see it this way, coupon income from the Treasury and the interest being sort of charged on the QE amount by the Bank of England. All right. So there's 35 billion sitting there at the moment as a profit from QE. What do you do with it? Here comes the twist. What do you do with it? You could leave it where it is. You know, you could take the view that at some point in the future, this thing is going to need to reverse QE. It's going to need to sell off the gilts that it's been busy buying. Okay. In other words, pull the lever back. And when it does so, it might need that money in reserve on the off chance that, you know, the economy is picking up, inflation's taking off, and that's causing gilt prices to fall. So the gilts that it paid quite a lot for, it's going to sell for quite a bit less, so it will need that as a buffer. But that's not what they're doing. Okay? You could use it to set up some kind of infrastructure fund, create jobs in the UK economy. Some people have speculated that would be a good use for it. There's a profit. I mean, whose profit is it? Arguably the UK taxpayer. This is all government or government-style organisations, so that profit could be used that way, but they're not doing that with it. What George Osborne has said is, I'll have it. I'm having that. I'll snaffle that. Okay? He's talked to Mervyn King at the Bank of England and said, well, that's quite a useful 35 billion profit, because to fund the coupons we're having to pay to this thing here, we have to go into the open market and borrow. That's madness, right? Because at the end of the day, we sort of own this thing. So we're borrowing, all right, at one rate to pay interest or coupons to something that we sort of own, all right? So why don't we just snaffle the 35 billion? In other words, the Treasury wants that 35 billion. They want it to end up here. Why? Because they want to use it to reduce the national debt. Okay, that's the use that George Osborne wants to put it to. Why? because, a bit like Gordon Brown, who set himself these kind of tricky targets to make himself look better as a manager of the economy, George Osborne has said, well, I want to reduce the national debt. I want to see the national debt falling as a percentage of GDP by 2015, 2016. The only way to do that, okay, is to start snaffling handy amounts like this. 35 billion, all right, goes some way to chipping away at that national debt, which is kind of the total borrowing accumulated by the UK, if you want to see it that way. Okay, the deficit is an annual amount which accumulates each year to give you the national debt, and he said, I want to get that down as a percentage of gross domestic product or UK output. All right. So George Osborne effectively said, from now on, okay, I'll take effectively the profit that's accumulated in here, around about 24 billion, and we won't be paying another 11 to the APF. So that adds up to 35 billion in total. Okay. Now, so far, if you're still with me, and some people won't be, but if you're still with me, right, you understand roughly what's going on there. What's the implication? I said at the start of the video, it's a little sort of sleight of hand. Some people might be saying, who cares? It's all inside the government in one sense. It's all taxpayer backed in one sense. So who cares? But it has one or two important ramifications that are rather larger than this little diagram suggests. Number one, okay, it does rather beg the question, how independent is the Bank of England? Okay, because this was George Osborne's idea, that say 35 billion should go from there to there. Okay, and QE and fiscal policy is technically all about the Bank of England. So is QE being diverted by a clever accounting trick into fiscal policy? You'll hear people talking about monetary policy being confused with fiscal policy. Bank of England, supposedly independent, monetary policy, interest rates, QE, that's their side of the equation. Nothing to do with George Osborne's fight to reduce our national debt. And some people have said, well, wait a minute, you're using a clever trick to blur the boundary, okay, between monetary and fiscal policy, or blur the boundary between the independent Bank of England and the Treasury. So there's a question worth asking. Number two, what does it actually achieve? It's just a cash flow fudge, really, but it's quite a clever one because it allows George Osborne to pull 35 billion forward to make his personal objective numbers look a little bit better than they otherwise would, okay, but that's all it does. It's not a permanent fix, it just pulls some cash flow forward, okay? And the third thing I would say, it does beg the question, when, if ever, do they plan to reverse QE? All right, because, as I said, one could argue this is a handy buffer against the possibility that when you come to sell-off gilts, okay, maybe prices are a little bit lower than when you bought them. All right, so that would be a useful buffer somewhere, okay, against that possibility. So maybe this suggests that actually the government and the Bank of England have no plans to reverse QE, okay? So it's a space worth watching. George Osborne would probably prefer this just got swept under the carpet, and indeed one or two newspapers haven't really commented on it very much, probably because it's quite technical. But what I'm suggesting is that what looks like a fairly small 35 billion sleight of hand could have one or two fairly large ramifications going forward. To download this free video to your favourite mobile device, find us on iTunes by searching for MoneyWeek. And the entire video archive is also available free. Just visit moneyweek.com.